Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kim Ricketts, and I manage the Visiting Speaker Series at Microsoft. Thanks for coming today. Today, we welcome Matthew May here, who is the Senior Advisor to the University of Toyota, and someone who has worked with Toyota on the inside for over a decade. Toyota has recently passed Ford to rank as the second biggest automaker in the United States, and will probably this year pass GM as the world's largest automaker. How do they do it? How do they implement 1 million new ideas every year? That is what Matthew May is here to talk about today, as outlined in his new book, The Elegant Solution, which is actually a tactical guide to the 10 practices that drive Toyota's creativity. I was looking at an interview I read recently with Matthew, and he said something that I think will resonate with us here at Microsoft. The prevailing definition of innovation is wrong. Hear the word innovation and you think technology. Toyota seems to get the fact that people don't want products and services, they want solutions to problems. And when it comes to solutions, simple is better. So please welcome Matthew May.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Welcome. I actually didn't know exactly how I was going to approach talking about the notion of elegance as it relates to innovation until I pulled into the visitor parking lot and I saw the banners that said ideas to reality. And it made the connection for me, because that's really, I think, the common ground that what I had to talk about, the common ground between Toyota, which is the old school, right, if you think about it, and Microsoft, which is the new school, but we're both in the business of implementing ideas. And you just heard that Toyota implements 1 million ideas a year. That's about 3,000 ideas a day. And it probably makes sense to start by defining what an idea is first, because it has a little bit different definition at Toyota. And how do you know you have 1 million ideas? Is it just someone clicking on an email and shooting it off to their manager? What do you mean by an idea? Is it a thought? Is it a dream? What is it? Well, an idea at Toyota has a very specific definition. And it's documented. And it's documented on a piece of paper. And that piece of paper has a discipline to it, and it captures a problem-solving methodology. It captures what I refer to as an idea loop. There's an investigation part of it. There is design part of it. There is an experimentation or execution part of it. And then there is an adjustment part, a reflection to it. And it's done on a big sheet of paper that we happen to call an A3. It refers to the international paper size. And that's how we know we have 1 million ideas a year. In Japan, it's called a Kaizen newspaper, and Kaizen is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. So in case you're wondering how real that 1 million ideas a year is, it's real. And that's how we know, because every single one is documented. So I want to start there, because as you heard, there's a big war being played out right now on the automotive front. And most of the pundits think that Toyota will, by the end of this year, become the world's biggest automaker in terms of units sold globally. I thought it would have happened by now, but there's a last battleground that's going to be played out, and it's going to be played out in China. And I'm thinking that GM may have a chance to retain their #1 position if they can get a stranglehold on China. But behind that growth, behind that amazing growth that Toyota has had, is this notion of ideas coming from every level of the organization. And so, as you heard Kim say, I want to talk about innovation in a different way. I want to have a different discussion around the very word itself. Because I believe that we've gotten to the point where we hear technology and we hear innovation, and they mean the same thing. And I'm not so sure that that's the right way to think about it. Tell you what, raise your hand. How many people do we have here? Raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a true innovator. Raise your hand, honestly. Don't be modest. True innovator. All right, 1/3 to 1/2. Now raise your hand if you consider yourself a good, strong problem solver? Almost every hand. And see, that's what I'm talking about. I think that when I ask those two questions, everyone should raise their hand. Because I believe that innovation is about solving a problem. As a matter of fact, the definition I'd like to put forth is one by David Neeleman. You know who he is? He's the CEO of JetBlue. And what David says is this: innovation is trying to figure out a better way to do something. Trying to figure out a way to do something better than it's ever been done before. Now, if you've ever read anything about Thomas Edison, he said the same thing. When asked his philosophy, he said, there's a way to do it better. Find it. And the reason I like that definition is because it gets rid of all of the crazy categories we have about innovation. Well, it's a process innovation. It's a technology innovation. It's a strategy innovation. It's a social innovation. Doesn't matter the realm. Doesn't matter the domain. It makes it accessible to everyone. If every day you come into Microsoft looking for a way to do something better than it's ever been done before, you are, by definition, in my mind, an innovator. And that's it. And that is probably why Toyota can implement 1 million ideas a year, because that's how they define innovation. Okay, so that's where I want to start from, is the notion of ideas, and that innovation is about those ideas. And I need to give you a little bit of backstory on myself, because I'm not a Toyota employee. I'm an independent guy. I'm an independent contractor. I was lucky enough, though, to be retained by them for about 5 or 6 years completely. And here's how it came about. In 1998, Toyota looked across the new millennium and they said, we need a new strategy. We're rapidly becoming a truly global organization. We're moving from this wide diversity and diversification internationally to being truly global. We need to make sure that in this time of expansion and growth that the principles, practices, and methods remain undiluted and robust. They came up with the notion of a corporate university to do that, to move the business forward, to make sure that the Toyota way, as it were, remained intact. The problem was they couldn't articulate what that was because they had been breathing the air so long. You ever talk to a really good salesperson and say, well, how do you do that? Can't tell you. He can show you how he does things, but he can't really articulate step by step the kinds of things that go through his brain as he makes these fantastic sales. And that's true of any person that's really considered truly talented. Very difficult to articulate. So you need sort of the outside perspective. Well, when they got together and tried to figure out who they were when they wanted to be, when they grew up as a university, they needed a facilitator to do the off-site retreat. And I was available. And by a happy accident, I got to facilitate that. And that turned into an assignment. They said, hey, we want to figure out how we can transport, transpose, transplant the constant creativity and innovation and engagement that we have in our factories and warehouses to the knowledge side of the business, to sales, marketing, distribution. And I said, oh, what a great idea. It was going to keep me employed for a few months, kicking around the factories and warehouses. And as a consultant working for a big company like Toyota, that's a nice feather in your cap. Back in my brain, I was saying, you're crazy. Everybody knows that factory work isn't creative. What are you talking about? Well, lo and behold, 600,000 ideas at that time were coming out of the factories and warehouses. Okay, little improvements, right? So I spent time in the factories and the warehouses, and what I learned sort of blew away every supposition I had, assumption I had, idea of problem solving that I had, idea of business innovation and how it should work. I thought, gosh, isn't it the professionals that are highly educated that do all the big thinking? They have all the great creativity. And when I got to work in the factory, I was sort of dismayed because I didn't function very well. I wasn't able to make all the kinds. I was there and I had a mentor and I had a tour guide. And I got to work the line, and I thought I was pretty smart. Gosh, I made a couple of improvements and suggestions. Well, this person made, over the course of 3 shifts, 5 solid improvements, innovation to a single way of doing work, putting on a windshield. How many ways can there possibly be to put on a windshield? That started to wake something up in me. There is something that you can't get by observation. You actually do have to breathe the air a little bit. And I kept getting stupider and stupider the longer I worked in that environment. And one day I was walking down the line, and I found out, I was being told by my mentor, that the story of Toyota and how it came to be. And I found out that the precepts and the tenets underlying the Toyota philosophy and way of doing work predated the car company. And I stopped dead in my tracks. I said, what? Well, the founder of Toyota died before ever seeing a Toyota automobile be built. I said, how is that possible? You're talking about principles and a way of building cars, and the guy's not even alive? And I was told in no uncertain terms, in a very short lecture, went something like this: Matthew, son, it's not about the car. You make it better for the next person down the line and the next process. If everybody does that, the world is better. Now that sounds like something out of Kung Fu and The Last Samurai, right? Grasshopper and all of that. But it dawned on me what Kim said, and that is that people really don't want the product or the service that you have. They're looking for a solution to a problem. They're looking for a solution to a problem. And we lose sight of that. We get caught up in our product and our gadget and our gizmo, and we forget the why behind the what. Right? And it becomes all about the product. And all of a sudden, now we're focused on what? The product and or our competition and keeping up with the Joneses. Right? And we lose sight of the fact that this is about making the world a better place, and that's what customers really want. So how do you do that? How do you make the world better through innovation? The only way I can really answer that is to take you back and tell you the story of the founder of Toyota. His name was Sakichi Toyoda, and the story begins in the late 1800s. And it's true. He died in 1930 before there was ever a Toyota automobile on the planet. He started in a farming community. Now, back in the 1800s, I don't know if you know anything about Japanese history, but Japan had been closed off from the Western world for most of history, since the 1600s, time of the Renaissance and after. They opened their doors in the mid-1850s to the Western world. 2 decades into that, they promulgated something called the Japan Patent Law. And that sort of brought forth a lot of would-be inventors. One of them was Sakichi Toyoda. Now, by training, he was slated to be a carpenter by his father. They lived in a rural farming community, and his father was a farmer. And he said, son, you're going to be a carpenter. And so by the age of 20, he had been trained in woodworking and carpentry. But something bugged him. And what bugged him was the fact that his mother, like all the other housewives in the village, would spend all day on a hand loom, weaving cloth to be sold so that clothing could be made. It's how they brought in extra money for the household. Now, looms hadn't changed in 5,000 years. Okay? Technology was geriatric. What bothered him was that at the end of the day, his mother would have to scrap an entire day's work because a single thread had broken in the cloth, making the entire piece of cloth unusable and you couldn't sell it. He decided that he was going to change the world by making a loom that would stop whenever a thread broke. It took him his entire adult life to do that. A couple of years into his work, and everybody thought he was crazy. His father thought he was crazy. He was eccentric. What are you doing, doing this? Well, a couple of years in, he had developed a wood foot loom. 10 years into his search and 100 patents later, he had developed a power loom, one that could be operated by one person could operate a number of power looms. His looms had the highest quality. They had cut production costs in half. They beat all the French and German looms. His star was rising quickly in Japan. In the mid-1920s, he invented the automatic power loom that would stop whenever a single thread was broken. And he sold those rights for $1 million+ yen worldwide. And that's when he died. Before he died, he said to his son, Kiichiro, here's 100,000 yen. You can do anything you want with it, as long as you start a car company. He had been to the United States, and he was amazed at the Model T. And he thought, that's the wave of the future. Automobiles is where we need to be. But that story is not about the loom. It's not about technological development of the automatic loom in Japan. If you think about it, there are 3 principles underlying that story that to this day drive everything at Toyota. And I think, if you read closely, most innovations in the world can be tied to one or more of these. Ingenuity and craft, the personal side of it, the innovation side, your work, right, as a professional, as a craftsman, as an artist, right? The pursuit of perfection. He was never happy. Nothing got in his way of his vision of this machine that would stop whenever a thread broke. Pursuit of perfection is the second. And the third is fit with society. Right? He really wanted to make things better for his village and, on a larger scale, the world. Ingenuity and craft, pursuit of perfection, and fit with society. Those are the 3 principles that drive those 1 million ideas a year. Because if you think about it, there are probably a few traps to innovation. And they're very, very tempting. They go something like this. Swinging for the fences. Trying to hit the home run, the killer app, out of the box. Right? Now, there's a big carrying cost to that, and it's very risky. That's a temptation, though. Right? I don't need the million little things. Give me the one that's going to, get in the news. That's the one we want. That's going to drive our top-line growth. That's one trap. Another trap is solving problems frivolously. How do you know you're faced with hundreds of problems every day? You have opportunities, especially in the kind of environment you're in, where you're in science and research and development. What do you work on? What are the important problems that you have to solve? Because solving problems willy-nilly, there's a reason we have an organization, right? We're trying to move a certain business forward. You'd be surprised how many times people are out there solving problems that are kind of wacky and completely out of the realm, out on the lunatic fringe, and really not tied to anything. Another one is the bells and whistles trap. That's very tempting, right? You see your competitor doing something, and we get all wrapped up in that, and we say, well, the way to do this is add more bells and whistles, and we'll out-whistle that guy, right? Meanwhile, someone's got to tell me how I get my cue to work, because it sure does great with the video, and it sure does great with the music. But by gosh, I wish it wouldn't drop all the calls. Now, maybe that's not a handset thing, but the thing that I love to do most with it is talk on it, and I can't always do that. So, those 3 principles, though, go a long way in defeating those traps. So I'd like to take them one at a time. Ingenuity and craft. Applied creativity. Very simple. Personal innovation. This guy by the name of Richard Florida wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class. Anyone heard of it? Read it? Okay. And Richard Florida says this: millions of Americans are starting to work the way scientists and artists always have. And when I read that, I thought, okay, scientists and artists. Okay. Well, why is that, first of all? And then how is that? Well, the why is pretty easy, because business demands it. If you think about it, I don't know about your life, but mine looks something like this. Every single year, budgets get tighter, projects get more complex, competition for resources gets tougher, right? Deadlines shrink. You got to do more with less. How are you going to do that? Don't you have to get more resourceful? And that's what we're talking about with ingenuity and craft, getting more resourceful. That's an easy one. The how is more interesting and more difficult to explain. how do you do this, ingenuity and craft? What are you talking about? You know, it's easy to see in things like sports and performing arts. You see the new schoolers, right? They've mastered the old school ways, but they've actually changed the game, usually in little ways with a huge impact. And that's elegance. And so let me talk about elegance as it relates to the ingenuity in craft. How many people have actually heard the term elegance solution before? Yeah. I mean, if you do a search on the net and elegance solution, usually what comes up are references to something to do with computer profession, right? Something to do with programming. And it has to do with minimum number of steps to achieve the optimal outcome. That's what elegance is all about, right? And that's what these new schoolers do. I mean, how many ways are there to swing a golf club, to swing a baseball bat, right, to swing a tennis racket, to surf a wave? Well, the answer is as many ways as there are individuals doing it. Right? Lance Armstrong. Anyone a cyclist? I'm a cyclist. Anyone follow his career? Okay. I mean, how can you figure out a new way to ride a bike? He did. He did. Following his bout with cancer, left his body in a different place. His musculature had changed. His body chemistry had changed. He actually took a scientific approach to a problem that was facing him. What's the best way for me to climb a mountain, given my talents, given my skills, given my body? And he dissected the power equation. And he figured out that he could have more power by having a quicker cycling cadence at a lower gear standing up than the traditional way of driving big gears while seated. Changed the game just a little bit, but he got scientific about it. Here's a bicycle rider getting scientific about his work. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about ingenuity and craft. And by the way, his record, 7 straight Tour de France wins, I don't think that's going to be touched in our lifetime. But that's ingenuity and craft, is taking a look at your work. And that's where innovation starts at Toyota. Every single day, a couple 100,000 people come into work looking not to do their work, but to take it to the next level. That's a fundamentally different mindset than most companies have. They're looking for ways to improve the work, not to do the work. That's different, but that's ingenuity in craft. Now, how do they do that? They constantly look at their work and constantly look for problems. And a problem in the Toyota world is a good thing. A lot of companies, a lot of people hear problem and they think there's something broken, I got to fix it. But a problem at Toyota is anytime there is a gap between where it is now and where it could be, perfection, that's a problem to be solved. And it's very artistic if you think about it. That's what artists do. They see a block of marble, a blank canvas. It's got very, very, very clear limits, constraints. And you got to think inside that box. Different way of thinking. Which gets me to the next point about perfection. Right? Gap between where we are now and perfection. And here is a critical thing that a lot of people don't get. When you hear the words pursuit of perfection, the Western mind only hears the last word. It only hears perfection. And it says perfection. Look it up in the dictionary. Pinnacle of achievement, point beyond which there is no improvement possible. And they go, well, wait a minute. Why pursue that? The Eastern mind hears the first word, the pursuit. You see, in Eastern philosophy, in Eastern religion, in Eastern cultures, only one person ever achieved perfection that I know of. It's Buddha. Right? Perfection is unachievable. It's like the star on the horizon that keeps you in the right direction all the time. You're never going to reach it, but it's what guides the journey. So it's the pursuit that's worthwhile. And so the question I always get is, well, if you can't achieve perfection, why even bother? Well, the quick answer is if you don't, you're going to be a follower. You're never going to be a leader. Because what's going to be driving you, what's going to get you out of the complacency, what's going to allow you, when you're at the height of your success, to reinvent yourself. And you're going to have to do that. Because sooner or later, the world's going to catch up to you, even if you're a mile out in front. The pursuit of perfection is all about the pursuit and chasing perfection. And whatever you're talking about, whatever problem you have in your work, constantly identify what's perfection look like, and not from my point of view, not from your point of view, from your customers. And that's a critical difference as well. Everyone's got a customer. We just don't think about them as customers. But at Toyota, everyone's got a customer. And that was an aha for me. What do you mean, everyone has a customer? Well, it could be another department. It could be another business unit. Somewhere, there is someone who is in receipt of that which you do on a daily basis. If you're not thinking about them as a customer and identifying what it is they need and what the problem is they're trying to solve, you can't get there. You can't get there. So pursuit of perfection. And I'll tell you a story. This really drove it home for me. Anyone follow golf? Tiger Woods? Okay. I belong to a country club in Southern California where every December, and it's coming up, he holds sort of the last tournament of the year for about 15 top guys, right? The Tiger Woods Challenge. And on a Monday evening, you know, golf tournaments generally have a pro-am, and then they start on a Wednesday and they go through Sunday. Well, on a Monday evening, I was in the little health club part, and I don't play golf, I play tennis. But there's only one health club in this, one little room in this country club. And I walk in on a Monday afternoon, 5 o'clock, 5:15. Lo and behold, there's Tiger Woods. Working out in my gym, alone. Right? Nobody ever goes to this little gym. It's not that great of a gym, but here's Tiger Woods. Right? And he's pumping iron. And I got to tell you, the guy's ripped. Right? Yeah, I mean, you think of golfers as you know, not someone, you know, the guy looked like a football player. He doesn't look like that on TV. Right? But, you know, he had sleeveless, and he was like, and I guess I was watching too intently. Because he said to me, you obviously know who I am. Who are you? And I said, well, I'm just a member here, but I got to tell you, I've been reading articles about you, and I remember reading Time magazine back in the year 2000, and it had talked about how you had reinvented your swing 6 or 7 months into your tenure as a pro. He had just defeated everyone, blown apart the field, you know, won the Masters by 12 strokes. Right? He had won all these tournaments, and he was taking the world by storm. And what did he do? He dropped off the face of the planet for a little while because he thought there was a better way to swing a golf club. Everyone thought he was crazy. Right? And he had said in that article, winning isn't the best barometer of getting better. And in that article, it actually said he had studied Toyota and how Toyota engineers will push a line to failure, right, to find out what could possibly go wrong and reinvent things after that. Kaizen, continuous improvement. I'll say more about that in a bit if there's time. And I said, so what drove you to do that? What drives you? Because he's now reinvented his swing 3 times. He just got done doing it this year, and he just won what? 6 straight. Same thing happened back when he did it the first time, dropped off the face of the planet. All of a sudden, he comes roaring back, wins 6 straight. I said, what drives you? I mean, is it because you're in here working out? There's no other golfers in here. Is this it? Is this you're just always fitness, always looking for? He said the number 18. And I thought, okay, I know what that is. You know what it is? It's a number of majors that Jack Nicklaus won. I said, is that what it is, or is it just a lucky number? He said, no, that's a perfect golf score. Never achievable, keeps him going, right? That is a mindset that's tough to bottle and tough to teach and tough to get. You got to have a certain presence and perspective on things to get that. But truly, that is part of what is behind those 1 million ideas a year, right? And you hear it in the tagline of Lexus, the relentless pursuit of perfection. The third one, fit with society. A good innovation, a great innovation, really meets the needs of society. if you think about it, right? It really meets a great and pressing need. In other words, it doesn't matter if you have the best mousetrap. If there's not a serious rodent infestation, it's probably not going to take off, right? But it's not enough to have just the mousetrap and the need. You got to have the delivery system to put it in the hands of the people that can make the most use and the best sense out of it. Right? Now that requires a certain kind of thinking. And you know what it is? You should know what it is. This is your life. Systems thinking. Right? Systems thinking, aka cause and effect. You need to know the success factors, the context under which a given innovation is going to succeed. We're not good at that. Generally speaking, across an entire organization, we're not that good at systems thinking, at providing that context. I mean, we hear it all the time, right? Think outside the box. Think outside the box. Raise your hand if you know what the heck the box is. Right? Well, the box is context, provided by the system and the structure you're working in. And here it is. You got two choices. And this is an application of the things that you build. You know, whether it's a computer, the Xbox, whatever it is, your idea better fit within the present system. Or, if you've got a new idea that's outside that system, you better have a box to carry that new idea in. That's your only choice. Now, not a lot of people get that. Thomas Edison got it. He knew that his little light bulb wasn't going to change the world. It wasn't about the gizmo, it wasn't about the gadget. So you know what he did? Because incandescent lighting had already been discovered across the ocean. So you know what the elegant solution for him was what? On-demand light and power. That's the need. That was what the world needed. That's what society needed. So what did he do? Over the course of 3 years, with virtually only his money, he created the entire power system in New York. And we're talking digging trenches, laying conduits, insulating the wire, coming up with the fuse boxes and the meters and everything that is attached to, the power stations, everything around that system that allowed the gadget to work. And when we always hear that, the light bulb. Well, no, it's the system. Right? The system. Now, there's a couple parts to systems thinking. There's insight, there's foresight, and there's hindsight. We're not that good at foresight. I mean, you see it all the time. The most recent example is probably the Katrina thing. How is it possible? I mean, because context really provides latitude for action, right? How is it possible that almost the identical circumstances are repeated? Right? In the 1950s, what happened? Right? In the Atlantic Ocean, same set of circumstances. Low levees, right? Predictions by weather experts that there's going to be massive flooding had been warned of for years, right? And it was devastation across the board, and they spent $5 billion building that place up. Well, lo and behold, the same thing happens again last year. Why didn't anyone listen? How is it possible that all the scientists had warned about it? Scientific American articles had warned about it. Books had been written about Louisiana. How come no one took action to prevent it? Poor foresight. Lack of systems thinking. Inability to think through cause and effect too far removed in time, distance, and space. Right? But we're pretty good at hindsight. Right? We're pretty good at the postmortem. But it always comes a little too late. And it's kind of funny. Everybody talks about culture. Right? We need a culture of innovation. Culture of innovation. Culture of innovation. And things are blamed on bad culture. 9/11 is blamed a lot on the culture of the CIA and the FBI. The culture didn't allow good ideas to bubble up, or they weren't thinking about the right things. Well, no, their system wasn't set up for that, is the problem. Same thing with the space, the Challengers, the space shuttles. Talk about NASA's perfect person culture and a bad culture. Well, no, their system was set up not to prevent liftoff, but to ensure liftoff. Right? And how come it is every time that something goes bad and we do the postmortem, it's a system change or a structure change? Well, we're going to restructure the entire organization. We're going to put a new system in place. Well, doesn't that mean that the culture that everybody talks about is rooted in a system and a structure. So if you want to change your culture, and you want those million ideas, that innovative culture, change your system, change your structure, because that's what's at the heart of it. I'll tell you a real quick story about how powerful this is. Because nobody really knew about Toyota and how they built cars and how they operated until the early 80s, mid-80s. Because they had never built cars here before. It was a Japanese thing. Nobody had access to see what was going on. So do you remember 1980? Anyone? Besides me? Remember the commercial, Where's the Beef? Okay. 1982. It's Jordache jeans. And we're a year into Reaganomics. And there's an oil shortage, oil crisis, right? And it's kind of funny. It's kind of the same thing that's going on right now in the car industry. High gas prices, predominance of gas guzzlers by the domestics, right? Need for an innovative solution. Anyway, in Fremont, California, there's a GM factory, and it's the darkest place on the planet. It is so bad that 20% of the workforce doesn't show up on any given day. They got to hire 20% more people to show up and make up for the people not showing up. There's rampant substance abuse. There's alcoholism. Legend has it that people would put coolers in the cars as they went down the line so that they could maintain their buzz. They'd have to hire special cleaning crews for shift change to clean up all the liquor bottles. There's 4 murders in 1 year. Now that's the soft side of the equation. The hard side of the equation is they had the worst quality in GM's lineup. They were GM's worst factory. It took them twice as long to build a car as any other factory. No one worked at that plant would drive a car coming out of that factory. You go to the employee parking lot, not a single model was in that employee parking lot coming off that line. Right? They would laugh when they saw a car that they knew they had a hand in building. It's pretty bad. Right? Well, you can't keep the lights on. Can't, right, in that kind of condition. So they shut the plant down. Well, there's trade restrictions on the horizon because all of a sudden Detroit's Big Three, and they just made another trip to D.C., as you may have read in the news, to plead their case. Went to, back then they said, we're losing market share to the Europeans, and these Japanese cars are starting to make entry. We need a little protectionism here. So there are these trade restrictions looming on the horizon. So Toyota says, we need to start building cars on American soil. So they began looking for a partner. Lo and behold, GM has got this dark plant, right? And so here's crazy Toyota saying, we'll take your plant and we'll go 50-50 with you. But here's the deal. We provide the cash. We reopen the line. We retool it, reconfigure it the way we build cars. Right? We'll build your cars. You can have access to our subcompact, because at the time that was what was really putting a ding in GM's lineup. And the UAW raised their hands and said, no. You can't do that without us. So it was a deal. We had to hire back all the union workers, because it was a militant union environment. There were 5,000 union grievances on file. That's how bad it was. Numerous wildcat strikes, walkouts, you name it, sick-outs, awful. So it was almost a deal breaker. But A.G. Toyoda, who was the chairman at the time, grandson of the founder, said if we can make our methods work in that kind of environment, we can make it work when we build our own plant. So 85% of the hourly workers were hired. Didn't want the managers. And by the way, there were 112 job descriptions, right, in this factory. There were 14 levels of plant management. This was a bad system and a bad structure. So they send the team lead, and they took those 112 and they squashed them down to 2. Team leader and team member. Makes sense, right? And they sent all the team leaders over to Japan to get trained on how to solve problems and what this thing, the Toyota production system, was all about. And the Toyota production system, in a nutshell, is when there is something going wrong, you stop and you fix it. Just like the loom. That's what it's all about. You stop and you fix it and you solve the problem, and you are not allowed to allow a problem to go to the next person. That's the Toyota production system in a nutshell. That and what happens in grocery stores, just-in-time inventory. That's it. Big secret, right? So they come back and they reopen the plant in 1984. Okay? By 1986, it is GM's #1 plant. They've gone from worst to first in 2 years. I challenge any organizational development consultant to do a culture change in 2 years with those kinds of results, and here are the results. It goes from 20% absenteeism to 3%. Pretty good, right? About normal. Goes from the slowest production of a car to the quickest. They had about 12 problems per car before, went down to 1 or 2 after. The 5,000 union grievances on file became 8,000 employee ideas implemented in year 1. People started working there, started buying the cars. Right? Within another 2 years, it was an award-winning J.D. Power and Associates plant. Still remains a high-performing plant, not the highest. Remains Toyota's only unionized plant. But what changed? It was the same people doing essentially the same work. What changed? Well, the system changed, #1. And within that system, the idea that Daddy doesn't know best, the worker knows best. The worker who's in charge of their work, is closest to the work, is in charge of perfecting it. It was the most empowering thing these guys had ever come across. And I've talked to people who were there before and after, and it was life-changing. You mean that I'm the expert in this work? I'm allowed to change it? I'm allowed to implement my ideas? Yeah, you are. As a matter of fact, not only are you allowed, you're required to do it. That is your job. Your job is no longer operating that machine. It's perfecting that entire operation. Ingenuity and craft, pursuit of perfection, fit with society. Those are the 3 ground-level principles. Now, how do you put them in place? Well, there's a series of practices that make it workable. And I'll give you a real quick inkling into a couple of them because we're running out of time and I want to open it to any questions that you might have. But there's this thing called Kaizen. It means continuous improvement, and it folds up into this notion of the pursuit of perfection. Kaizen means make better, right? Improvement for the better. You've heard of Zen, right? Well, it's part of the word. And here's the funny thing, it's not Japanese. It's an American-made concept. It's a Japanese word, but it's an American-made concept. We just lost it. We lost it in World War II. So let me give you a real quick history lesson. But Kaizen is what really keeps Toyota going with those 1 million ideas a year. It's 1940 and France falls to Germany. What do? We're going to get in the war. Roosevelt sets up some emergency services. One of them is called Training Within Industries. Training Within Industries was a series of training programs. One of them was called Job Methods Training. At the heart of it was this concept called continuous improvement. And in a nutshell, it was, we're going to war next month. We don't have time for a lot of research and development and fancy new technology and ideas and weaponry. We got to get better building the stuff that we already have. We have to improve the stuff that we already have because it's going to be tested in battle conditions. We're not going to be rolling down the freeway anymore. We're going to be at war. Right? These things have to be the highest performance, whatever it is, an airplane engine, a truck engine, whatever it is, it's got to be better. So at the heart of it is little ideas implemented as close to the front line as you possibly can. So they started with 5 course developers, trainers. They trained 10 others. Those 10 trained another 20. It was sort of like a pyramid scheme. And they canvassed the countryside, American factories, teaching continuous improvement. And by the end of the war, in 1945, there were 2 million people had been trained. And anyone who's a history student knows that our production prowess had everything to do with our ability to defeat the Axis powers. 25% improvement in quality, cost, and speed across the board. It was huge in a little bit of time. 1945, boom city. Boom time, baby boomers. Everybody's fat and happy in the United States. Forget all that quality improvement. No, we don't need it. We don't have to think about it. Everybody's buying everything we make. Well, what do we have to do in Japan? Anyone know? We had to rebuild the place. We had flattened it. Quite honestly, Tokyo was very hard hit, right? So there was a 7-year occupation under Doug MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur, name ring a bell? And he got over there, and what did he see? He saw instability all over the place. He saw a threat of interrupted supply lines. He saw a threat of communism from Korea. He saw starvation. He saw civil unrest. And he said, I need a way to stabilize. We need to put a stake in the ground. The industry is destroyed. They've got no business game going. There's no standards. There's no employee involvement. There's no management practices. This place is in a shambles. Get me the training within industries thing. It's gone. It's gone. The war was over. Well, luckily, one smart entrepreneur that was part of those 5 course developers had started his own business. MacArthur brought him over, and they did the whole thing again. And Japan soaked it up. They had nothing else going for them. They had little of anything. Everything they had to do had to be rethought. They had no resources, no money, no people. You want to compete internationally, you better think about a different way of doing business. You want to go head-to-head with Ford and GM, who's got slack resources a mile deep? You've got to think of a way to do more with and for less. The way to do it was these little ideas. The one thing they did have was people who wanted to give their ideas. And so that's how it all came about. And within 5 to 7 years, Kaizen became religion, business religion. Took another 10 or 20 years for the whole story to be played out. But if you remember back in the 60s, Japanese products were what? Cheap knockoffs. Right? The story started getting played out in the 1970s, and by 1980, quality was what Japan was known for. Right? The interesting thing is now is Toyota's quality it's parity. I mean, you think about it, this industry is an old industry, and you've got Toyota on one side and the entire rest of the industry on the other. You know, it's only about $450 billion industry in terms of market value. 220 of that is Toyota's. You line up Toyota and all the market cap of the rest of their competitors. How's that possible? Flat demand. Flat demand, mature industry. How is that possible? Kaizen. Kaizen. Continuous improvement, little ideas, everybody's involved. Works like this. Create a standard, follow it, find a better way. Create a standard, follow it, find a better way. Every single day at Toyota, people are looking to find the better way to improve the standard operating procedure in their work. Standard operating procedures at Toyota are completely different than most any organization I've come across. Most standards and most standard operating procedures in most companies are developed not by the people doing the work as they are at Toyota, but they're by a central operating committee, far removed from the work, and they're meant to stay for a long time. We'll update them every 5 years. No. At Toyota, a standard is meant to be changed. And it's not a script on how to do something. It's a template. It's a snapshot. It's here's the best practice that we know of today. It may change hourly, it may change daily, it may change weekly. But that's how they keep going. That's practice number 1, and it is mandatory. Now, the question I always get is, what's the motivation for all these ideas? Anyone thinking about that? How do you reward all these ideas? And that gets back to the whole notion of pursuit of perfection and Kaizen and that Eastern philosophy. Do you know that a Japanese company, and I didn't study it, this comes out of the Employee Involvement Association in Washington, D.C. A Japanese company, on average, implements 100 times more ideas than the average U.S. company? A U.S. company rewards an idea 100 times greater than the average reward of a Japanese idea. Now, what are we doing wrong? We're rewarding the wrong thing. In America, in Western culture, we reward accepted ideas. Right? But what does that do? It actually quashes and squashes human creativity. Because people say, well, my idea is probably not going to get accepted, so why bother? Right? In Japanese culture, submission of ideas is rewarded. Not only is it rewarded, it's required. Because there is a natural desire for us to have our creativity and our ideas heard in our work. It's almost impossible to do any work without thinking about there being a better way. I don't care if you're sweeping out your garage. By the time you're done sweeping out your garage, I bet you got a pattern of how you're sweeping it out, right? You've improved that work. It's natural for humans to do, and what organizations do is put stuff in the way of that creativity. Layers of bureaucracy, budget approvals, approval committees, all the stuff that slows down that juice. And that's all Toyota does, is recognize that and get all that stuff out of the way. That's all they do. So Kaizen is one practice. The other one is called, you don't have to remember this, Genchi Genbutsu. Sounds like Gensu knife, right? Genchi Genbutsu means go look, go see. One of the things Toyota does very, very well is connect with their customers. They spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out the shifts in markets and demographics. Give you a quick example. 2 examples. You've heard of the Prius, right? The hybrid, very popular. Do you know that they started that work back in the early 1990s? They totally reconfigured how they did research and development because it was all product focused before. It's all model focused. And they said, no, that's not, we're going to rethink. If we're going to have any success in the future, we need to be able to get out in front of the parade to identify a need that's in existence now but it's not articulated and be there when the customer gets there. Now, that's not creating a need. That is figuring out a current need and meeting it. And that's a different mindset. But they reconfigured how they did their research and development. And out of the early brainstorming sessions was this environmental consciousness that they tapped into. And they said, you know what? This is a high priority for us. Lo and behold, at the Kyoto Conference on Global Warming in 1997, their Prius, which was launched first in Japan, was in production. Not production ready, not prototyped, in production. They had 4 models there. Guess who one of the people was that drove that car? William Clay Ford. And he said, oh, that's an interesting idea. No business case for it. SUVs, trucks, that's where it's at, right? But Toyota was there, and lo and behold, the story gets played out now. Same thing with this Scion. Have you heard of the Scion cars? Do you know that marketing executives at Toyota attended, of all things, raves? Raves. Can you imagine marketing executives at Toyota going to an underground hip-hop techno party? Because they had tried marketing the Toyota brand to Generation Y, and they weren't having any of it. It failed. They had this thing called the Genesis Group, and it utterly failed. Out of that failure came the notion that, well, I understand that marketing and innovation is required to create a customer. It's Drucker stuff, Peter Drucker, right? Well, we had the marketing, we didn't have the innovation. We need the innovation. So they spent time at urban art shows, raves, and extreme sporting events. And they tapped in to that millennial thinking. And they discovered that what the new generation wants to do more than anything else is express themselves personally. It doesn't matter that the thing looks like a toaster. It matters that when you open it up, they can customize it. They can put their carbon fiber stuff in there. They can put the flat panel TV. They can put the subwoofers in, right? They can hook up to the internet if they want to. You know, at a place where I live down in Southern California, a Saturday afternoon, those Scions are lined up like this with the backs open. And everyone's displaying. It's not about the car. It's about, here's what I did to my car. And they tapped into that. They can't keep enough of those things on the lot right now. I wouldn't buy one. I don't like the way it looks. But I'm not the new generation. Right? So they tap into the customer. They go look and they go see. They become the customer. They infiltrate the customer. You guys do this, right? When you're looking at how people work on the desktop and work with programs. At least I've read that's part of what you do, right? And so most of what I've said today probably is confirming on some level. But they become the customer. They infiltrate the customer and they observe the customer. They sort of triangulate around that customer. They figure out that the events behind these shifts have already occurred. It's a matter of getting out in front of that parade and being there when the customer gets there. The final thing I'll talk about as a practice they do, this whole notion of learnership. And there's a word, it's called hansei. It means reflection. And this is the Bill Gates Think Week kind of stuff, right? Reflection is a huge part of Eastern philosophy and Japanese culture. School kids are taught it. Now, in our world, we only really do postmortems at the end of an entire project or when something's gone wrong. Reflection is done at Toyota all along the way at certain milestones to make sure that A, what was supposed to happen, happened. If not, why not? They conduct what's called what the Army calls an after-action review. It's a specific meeting held to learn. And it's not about placing blame or finding fault. It's trying to learn, here's what happened, here's what was supposed to happen, and why is there a delta if there is one. We don't do a good job of that in our companies here in the United States much. But it's a huge part. And here's the thing. If you go to a Hansei meeting at Toyota, it can be very depressing. Because a lot of times a team will far exceed their expectations. What do we do in America? Pop the champagne and slap the back. You know what would happen in a Hansei meeting at Toyota? You'd be like, wait a minute. That means you didn't understand your process. If you that far exceeded your targets, you did not understand the situation going in. There's learning there. Now, school children are taught that in Japan. You come home with 3 A's and 2 C's. What do we do here in America? Great on the A's. Bring those C's up. Right? In Japan, it'll be, well, what allowed you to get the A and what allowed you to get the C? And is there a difference? So irrespective of performance, Hansei is conducted. And it's a matter of reflection, introspection, and really trying to figure out the difference between the target and the execution and what needs to be adjusted. Those 3 practices, Kaizen, Ginchi Genbutsu, and Hansei. And there are others. And I don't necessarily use that kind of language in this particular book. But that's it. That's what makes Toyota able to implement 1 million ideas a year. Who's got the first question?
It's a quick question. You talked about rewarding ideas, submission of ideas. I just wanted to know, how do you balance that with making sure that the right ideas are still coming forth and not just for the sake of the reward? So the quality of ideas is still maintained.
Good question. Good question. The question is, how do you know that the ideas being submitted are the right ones? Right? Right? Sort of not way out there. They're sort of the right.
I don't way out there just for the rewards, but the kind of ideas that are still qualitative enough and springing from innovation rather than looking at the reward just because I want to submit an idea to get a reward.
Yeah, first of all, the only reward that you get at Toyota for any idea is thanks for the idea. And the reward is that you get to execute your idea. That's the good reward. And that's the only there is no monetary reward at Toyota. It is that an idea is something that has been wrestled to the ground that says, here's a gap, right? And it's within the domain of your work and your team. And I'll tell you how I do this with other organizations, because I spend a lot of time trying to implant this kind of thinking in other organizations, and I'll tell you how I do that. But the reward is that you're not an internal consultant at Toyota, right? If you have a team together and a manager has said, listen, we've got 100 yards of playing field and there's something funky in the 10 to 20 yard line. I don't know what it is, but you're the team to solve it, right? That's it. That's all you need to know. You got the manager's objective. There's something tugging at him, right? And this team is turned loose to do it. And it's not a recommendation to the manager when they're done. It's here is our theme. This is what we want to do. And the reason we want to do it is that we've determined that these are the following facts. we've determined that the gap exists and could be improved because of this factor or these factors. We think that perfection looks like this. Here are a couple of alternatives that will get us there. The ones that we can execute within 30 to 45 days, whatever the time period is, are these, and here's our plan to do it. Here's how we're going to measure success. Here's the impact up and down the line across the organization, and here's our timeline for executing it. That's what gets presented to the manager. And generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, the manager says, yeah. And when I do this with other companies, there's a tendency to fix other people's problems. In other words, I'll get a team together, and well, that department, they really need to. Nope. You're only allowed to improve and innovate within your domain, within your team. So when I try and do this with other organizations, and I'll tell you, I've done it with, believe it or not, the Los Angeles Police Department, which is, you watch YouTube, you'll know that I've actually done work with the Internal Affairs Department. Kind of impact I'm having, right? Luckily that had predated the work I've done with them. But when I do this with other organizations, I start, and here's what a lot of companies love to do. They want to have everybody in their company go through this training. Let's get 1,000 people go through this. No. You start with one team. You start with one manager. And you go to that manager, and because the complaints you always hear are, my ideas don't get heard. My manager won't let me. I don't have enough resources, all those kinds of things. You know, I hear that from CEOs. I do. It doesn't matter what level you're talking about. The CEO says, my board won't let me do that. So you go to the management, the board, whatever, first, and you cut the deal up front. I call it a clamshell strategy. If you're trying to do this in an organization, you've got to cut that deal right up front. Because the last thing you want to do is spend a couple of days with the team coming up with a real innovative idea and then have the manager go, great idea, no. You can kiss innovation, improvement, Kaizen, goodbye after that. So I cut the deal up front. And it's a great deal because I say to the manager, listen, you're going to tell us what's keeping you up at night. We're going to tackle it. You're going to select the team that's going to tackle it. They are going to find out something that they can improve or innovate around within that objective. They're going to come up with a plan. They're going to execute the plan. They're not going to ask you for a stitch of money or capital expenditure. You've got to be able to do this with no resources first because it takes no genius to spend money. None. It takes genius to be elegant. Right, and do more with less. They're not going to have any headcount, no material expenses, and they're going to do it within 30 to 45 days. And they're going to do it as an experiment, as a beta. You never, ever, you know this, right? I'm preaching to the choir. You don't go out nationwide, final product. Everything is an experiment. Manager goes, wait a minute. I don't have to have any budget reallocated. This team is going to find time in their own schedule to do this. They're going to tackle something that's really bugging me. They're going to execute this thing. And all I have to do is what? All you have to do is challenge their thinking and say yes. You are not allowed to say no unless they cannot answer your challenge of their thinking. Never had a manager say no yet. So, good question. Who else has a?
Like out of this million ideas, not every idea will be a success. How do they deal with failures?
Failure is an opportunity at Toyota to learn. That's why everything is a pilot first. So there is no failure because when the goal is to learn, every single one of these ideas does not have a goal to succeed in the outcome. I mean, because that's the only place you can really fail. But if the goal really is to learn, you cannot fail. If you think about it. If it didn't work, you've learned. That's a good thing.
the significant differences between the culture between Japan and Western in terms of company loyalties, right? So in Japan, I think even in other countries, in China, people are not loyal to the company. In Japan, it's different. So they're willing to do work even the company does not give them a reward. Staying there in the company is a reward because they want to work for the same company for the rest of their life, right? Here, it's so different. And people do not have loyalty to the company, they are true loyalty to their career, right? So I think that's big differences. So I don't know how they make the California plan work, but I'm just curious about it.
Let me answer it this way. First of all, it's changing in Japan.
Yeah.
That whole lifetime employment thing is changing and changing rapidly. That's number one. But the other thing is, I'm sorry, the question is the notion of, in Japan, people tend to spend their entire career with one organization. At least up until about 20 years ago, that was the case. How does that affect the notion of this constant improvement and innovation? And that gets back to the notion of standardized work. Remember I talked about Kaizen, and it's all about creating a standard, following it, and finding a better way. The danger of people leaving is what? Knowledge goes with them. That's why standards are so important. Right? Standardized work, if it's done correctly, so that at any given point in time, the very best practice known for executing a given, whether it's a checklist of a previous product, right, design, documents, whatever, it stays. So the knowledge never leaves. Right? That's one thing that you maintain that constancy through standardized work. And that's present in design, engineering, manufacturing, marketing, sales. It doesn't matter. Accounting, administrative support. It doesn't matter. Everyone's got standards, and they remain. So in one way to answer the question is, if someone leaves, it's not a catastrophe. It's not, there's nothing that you lose because someone has left. Now the other is, and the research is pretty clear on this, people generally do not, they really don't leave for money purposes. They leave because they've got a bad manager. And the Gallup organization has reams of research on this. People don't really leave a company, they leave a manager. Now, if your manager is allowing you and releasing you to have your ideas heard all the time, and you've got that creative freedom, which you do, you are less likely to leave that, because you're not going to find that in many organizations. And quite frankly, one of the reasons that this kind of material, the Toyota stuff, really isn't out there in a way that reveals some of the truths, is because nobody leaves the place. Nobody leaves. And you don't get kicked off the island. Right? It's very difficult to get. The one thing that will get you kicked off the island at Toyota is not engaging in Kaizen and continuous improvement, because it's mandatory, and disrespect of any kind. The whole thing works because of a respect for people. That's one of their core values, right? And you see it in the factory. It's what the guy told me. You've got to make it better for the next person. You've got to give the next person what they need so that they can do their work. If you don't, you get kicked off the island because that's not respect for people. That's not teamwork. Right? Does that address some of your issues?
I think when people not are loyal to the company, they are not willing to give ideas without the work. Right. For example, if you give ideas, a lot of people fear about job security. Right? Basically, you prove your job efficiency, you probably lose your job. So that's, in Japanese company, very unlikely, because they will change your jobs. But here it's different.
Well, the interesting,
that's the cultural differences.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, and again, the cultural differences. The interesting thing is, here in the United States, there is no Japanese culture for Toyota. It's all United States people working in the factories, and there are many cultures and languages, but there isn't the presence of Japan there. So, and that gets back to the whole notion of the system and the structure creating that culture. right? So every single Toyota facility, whether it's an office or a factory or whatever it is, has a little microculture of its own that develops around the notion of continuous improvement, and it's driven down to the front line of whatever operation that is. And people really bond to that because you connect ingenuity and craft. You connect at two levels to your work: the task, right? And Toyota does an awful lot to get people fit. Task to talent, right? Talent to task fit. They spend an inordinate amount of time. If you want to get hired even into a factory, it could be months. They're looking at how you do work. They're testing you. They're auditioning you. You're actually working on the line first, going through interview. You name it. They want to make sure that that fit is there. So you connect at that level. In other words, if you're an idea person, you need to be in an idea kind of role where you're constantly thinking. If you're a taskmaster, you need to be in that process role. If you're more of the diplomat, the peacemaker, and you work the white space of the organization, then you need to be in those kinds of roles. And they spend an awful lot of time getting that connection. Then it's the connection to cause. Why is my work important in the scheme of things? And if you can connect at both levels, task and cause. In other words, I'm doing this windshield thing. Why is that important in the scheme of things? Because it could save someone's life. Right? I connect to my work at two different levels. I'm not likely to leave that. So we spend an awful lot of time and effort making sure that those connections are solid.
You have about one more question.
Yeah, one more question.
Maybe you've answered this partially, but it sounds like it has to be a cultural mindset that pushes down on the ranks, the frontline workers. But what if it doesn't exist like that right now? What can an individual who buys into this cultural change do at this level to have it kind of bubble up?
The question is how does one person, right, in a given culture
Of change and to do this cultural change. How can an individual do that if it's not being pushed down?
If it's not there to begin with, this kind of culture, this kind of system doesn't exist, how do you begin? And that gets back to the one team. You start with one team, right? And it does mandate one person, one individual, one manager, if you will, that's got some level of responsibility over others, that has objectives in front of him or her, and is going to release a team to help meet those objectives. It always starts very organically, team at a time. So that's my best answer to that, is if you've got, and as I said, I've done this with the LAPD, and if you can do it there in a paramilitary organization, which is command and control, where the only people in the room that can possibly have ideas are the command staff, right? It's very military like that. If you can do it there, you can do it anywhere, but I always start with one team. You got to find the pocket of readiness where someone says, I want to try this with my group. Right? It's very difficult for one person who's an individual contributor to do this, right? To create an entire system like this. But it needs to be organic. So I always start with one team. And now if you've got 8 people on that team, guess what? Those 8 people should then spawn projects. Now you've got a manager who's got 8 people. If it's a one-off project, that's no good, right? You got to say, coming out of this initial project that we do, 8 people should have 8 new ideas. That may require 8 more teams to go, and it spreads virally like that. So, oh, I'm sorry. We're
Go ahead.
I'll take this if you can.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Who in American industry today does innovation well? I mean, in your experience.
It does innovation well? Well, Microsoft does innovation well.
Okay, if you know that. Fast that we can learn from. Constant improvement.
Constant improvement?
Continuous improvement.
Gosh. I can only speak from, I guess, at an arm's length. I guess, just reading the material and things like that. Those that I have personal involvement with are few, because I've spent most of my career in the last 10 years with Toyota. But gosh, anyone who's Apple is constantly doing things that are better. most of the companies that get the limelight and the books that are written about are doing it well. I mean, I think that's an easy one to. I mean, they're there for a reason. I mean, if you're not innovating, you are going to be out of the race sooner or later. I mean, if you read the In Search of Excellence kinds of things, where companies have fallen off the radar is because they haven't constantly. They've changed their behavior. What got them to success, now they protect it. That's a fundamentally different kind of behavior than the behavior that got them there in the first place. So you get to be very successful, and what do? You go into protection mode, right? And all of a sudden speed bumps are erected, right? Well, we don't want to change anything because things are going well. And you change the entrepreneurial spirit that got you there. So,
Thank
right.
you, Matthew.
Thank you.